may be one individual in Florida. Part of my concern is to make sure that we don't start having a whole bunch of folks all across the country think this is the way to get attention. This is a way of endangering our troops.
Yeah, but they are getting a lot of attention. That, of course, U.S. President Barack Obama responding today to the Florida pastor who threatened to set fire to copies of the Koran on 9/11. Now, Terry Jones may have backed down from this controversial act, but another congregation in Topeka, Kansas, now says they will pick up the torch and burn Korans on September 11th. Is this the start of a growing wave of attacks on Muslim America, one that could seriously undermine the president's strategy in Afghanistan, as he just said? What should he really be doing about it? Joining me now is Eboo Patel. He's the president of the Interfaith Youth Corps, and he's also the author of the book Acts of Faith. He is in Chicago. Eboo Patel, thanks so much for being here. And, you know, both of us are following, along with many other people, the developments on this story about the Florida pastor's plan to burn the Koran. Of course, there's reports now about another church in Kansas that has said, regardless of whether Pastor Jones burns Korans or not, they intend to burn them along with American flags. Now, the audience just heard the president talking about his concerns. You've advised President Obama on matters of interfaith issues before. What would you advise him to do now?
Well, I would advise him to keep on being clear about the arc of American and indeed world history. That when the demons of division show their ugly faces in this country, the better angels of America's unity and cooperation go into action. And that's precisely what we're seeing now, Evan. You know, my friend, the Reverend Bob Roberts, who's an evangelical pastor down in Texas, this is the 25th anniversary of his church this weekend, and he's using the occasion to preach from his pulpit in front of thousands of evangelical Christians the power and importance of building common ground and peace between people of different faiths, especially Christians and Muslims. I know of this great interfaith event that's taking place in New York City this weekend. A rabbinical student named Joshua Stanton, a born-again Christian named Frankie Fredericks, both of them have worked with my organization, the Interfaith Youth Corps. They're bringing people from different religious backgrounds together, including no religion at all, to stand up for the highest principles of American inclusion and saying intolerance will not win in America or anywhere else. But that's what the president is talking about, and that's what I find so encouraging.
But the question here is, should the president, should Secretary Clinton, should the Prime Minister of Canada, should the Pope, who have all commented on this pastor's plan to burn the Quran, really be wading into this? And I ask you that because here's a guy who's fundamentally irrelevant. He has a tiny church, congregation of 50 people. He wants to do this very provocative act, and suddenly he's getting calls from the U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates. Suddenly he's a world player on the world stage. Should the president be legitimizing this one person?
I think all of our leaders and all of our citizens should always be standing up for the highest principles of pluralism. So right now, the ugly face of the demons of division happened to be this marginal pastor in Florida. But I think that pluralism and cooperation and unity is one of the most important things we need to be standing up for today. And I would think that our national and global leaders, and indeed every citizen across this country in America and the world, should be standing up and saying, as the first president of the United States said, that this country will give bigotry no sanction and persecution no assistance.
Now, you understand that this is now being linked to the Muslim Community Center project in New York City, the so-called Ground Zero Mosque. Now, the man behind that, Imam Rauf, is a guy you know. You've written about this. Now, Pastor Jones has said somehow he's linking his desire to burn or not to burn Korans with whether the Ground Zero Mosque, as it's called, should go forward. What does this tell you as these things start getting linked? Are we seeing the beginnings of something larger afoot here?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll tell you, I find it a little bit curious that somebody who would burn a holy book is equating that action somehow with the building of an interfaith center. And my guess is that most Americans and most people of good faith around the world will find that a peculiar comparison also. What I find very encouraging is that there is a plan underway for a group of pastors and priests and rabbis and Hindu and Buddhist leaders and Americans of secular humanist background to engage Pastor Jones. And I have to tell you, this past week, although there's been some darkness for sure, there's been a lot of light. The stars are out, the stars of interfaith cooperation and unity in America. Cardinal McCarrick, a very important Catholic leader, came out and said, America is based on love and not hate. Richard Cizik, a very important evangelical leader, said, shame on you to Pastor Jones to think that
my question
Jesus...
is, but the leaders are saying that. But is this, some have said, that beneath that kind of conciliatory talk lies a different, angrier America? One that might be Islamophobic, that the issue of the Ground Zero Mosque, that Pastor Jones has tapped into frustration, possible hatred, possible bigotry, and that he's getting this attention because it's got traction. That's a scarier thought.
Evan, I put this in the context of American history. And in American history, there was a period of anti-Semitism. And in American history, there was an ugly period of anti-Catholicism. And of course, there was the period of slavery and segregation. Many communities that are defined by a particular race or ethnicity or religion have experienced intolerance. But always the forces of inclusion in American history defeat the forces of intolerance. And again, the thing that I find so encouraging is those forces of inclusion being louder and more active than ever. And I have to tell you, the grassroots action that I see is grassroots action for interfaith cooperation. Today I was in front of 3,500 Christian leaders in America, and dozens and dozens and dozens came up to me afterwards and said, what can I do to make for sure that religion is a bridge of cooperation and not a barrier of division in America? And part of what we've had to do at my organization, the Interfaith Youth Corps, is put together toolkits for these grassroots leaders to take interfaith action, to start interfaith service projects. And I just want to make sure that your audience knows about these toolkits, because I'm guessing that people of good faith all around the world are saying, how do we build bridges instead of build barriers? So if your audience wants to check...
Oh, go ahead. You just finish that. Sorry.
I said if your audience wants these toolkits, they can get them at ifyc.org. And we're getting requests from hundreds and thousands of people. How do we build bridges and not forfeit the territory to those who would build barriers?
But let me just put a final question to you. The truth about the United States and about Canada and about all democracies is we've got freedom of speech. There's the people in Topeka are saying we want to burn the American flag. A lot of people hate that. A lot of people don't like that. But guess what? They have the right to do it.
And nobody's arguing with that.
And Christians, you watch Monty Python, they make fun of Jesus. Jews, there's all sorts of comedies about that. But when it comes to Islam, some have said you can't make fun of it, you can't have conversations about it without a risk of violence. And somehow that democracies are giving back the freedom of expression because of a fear of violent reaction. And in fact, that's the very thing we should be championing. There should be supporting cartoons of religious figures because we have the right to offend people, just not harm people. How do we balance those two things?
Right. So, I believe that civil rights belong to all people, and there's been no question about the civil rights of people engaging in freedom of speech actions, even those that are offensive. But I think that a really high principle right now is the principle of cooperation between those of different backgrounds. There are powerful forces in the world trying to make religion a bomb of destruction. There are powerful forces trying to make religion a barrier of division. We need to have a movement of an even more powerful force making religion a bridge of cooperation. And I think standing up for pluralism, standing up for cooperation in the face of the demons of division, that's the work of this era.
Final question to you. Do you think Muslims feel more vulnerable in America now than at any other point?
Both more vulnerable and more hopeful. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, when the night is darkest, the stars are clearest. And because those better angels of America's unity and cooperation have come out and said, we are going to be an America that is liberty and justice for all, we Muslims know that we're going to participate in that America, we're going to contribute to it, and just as the period of anti-Semitism and anti-Catholicism and segregation ended, so will this period of anti-Muslim bigotry, and this country will be America for all.
If they do burn those Korans, either in Florida or in Topeka, what do you think could the consequence of that be?
I think part of the consequence of that is going to be people of good faith saying, we are going to engage in projects that show the world that what America and the rest of the world is about is lifting up the forces of unity and cooperation and marginalizing the demons of division. Right? That person may well have the right to do that, but that is not going to define America. It's not going to define Christianity. We have to define the world on an ethic of unity and cooperation.
Eboo Patel, appreciate hearing those words of hope in a very volatile situation that we're all watching very closely. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Evan.
In the meantime, CBC has new details about that alleged homegrown